Hello, everyone. Can you see the screen? This is June Hamid here. We're about to start in 12 minutes. It's now Dubai time is 11:48. Kuala Lumpur is 3:48. Hello, everyone. Can you both hear and see me? Okay, good. Welcome. So can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Yes? So can you hear me? Okay, wonderful. So we have 4 people here in our webinar today, and we have another 11 minutes. So we'll wait for the rest to come in. I believe we have a few. So it's wonderful to see everyone coming in to the webinar. And perhaps if you can just, for the moment, in terms of how we're going to do this, is when we start at 4 o'clock, I will go straight into the webinar presentation. So we have a few slides to go through. And in the interest of being able to interact, perhaps we could have the questions at the bottom part here. However, I think we can keep the conversation, keep the questions there, and towards the end we could have the mics open, as and when there are questions from specific people, and then I could answer it based on the questions that are asked. So, as a presenter, I have the speaking main rights, but I think for yourselves, you could also open up when the presentation is over to ask questions, and we'll see how we go in terms of the interaction and the interest to know more about specific areas. So, so how is everybody doing? How is everyone? How are your countries doing at the moment? Is there full, I mean, are you back to work? How is the economy? And is there a restriction movement order still? How are things going? Okay, very good, very good. So we have from Bahrain, from Nigeria, okay, from Ghana. So we have quite an international lot of people here. Wonderful. So good to know, good to hear. Has anyone been on any training, any other Aztec training or online training? It seems to be some sort of a norm that everyone is gaining knowledge and communicating a lot. So what are the other tools you're using? What are the tools everyone's using? Wonderful. Okay, so doing great as a country, Ghana. Restrictions are being eased up. Fantastic. Similar here in Malaysia too. Okay, good, very good. Now the Wi-Fi, I think in most countries are being burdened. So if there is some choppiness or intermittent gaps, we will try to keep track of the conversations and also the questions and the presentation. So rest assured the presentation will be uploaded and recorded on our Aztec portal. So you could access that later, most definitely. We will make sure of that. Okay, wonderful. Okay. So all is we have, I think we have quite a few now. People. Yeah, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 already in the chat room and also online in the webinar. So welcome for those of you who have just joined in. Thank you very much. And I really look forward to this opportunity to be able to interact with everyone on a subject that is very close to my heart, which is performance management. And I've prepared some special presentation, which is considering and consolidating what are the issues now in terms of the pandemic and also post-pandemic, what to do in the near future. So it's good to hear from everybody that things are beginning to look positive, and we always want to look for that. We want to look out to see how the economy is going to recover and also persevere in that sense. Wonderful. So we have, I think we'll definitely start on the dot at 4. I mean, here in Malaysian time, it's 3:55. In Dubai, it's 11:55. So we will start exactly at 12 noon. And in the meantime, if there's anything to be shared in terms of your countries and how things are doing, it would be good to get some feedback, some ideas about what's happening outside of our particular situations now. 10:55 in Bahrain. Okay, yes. Right. So we're following the Dubai time, which is 11:55 a.m. And we will start shortly in 5 minutes. Okay. So doing well in Bahrain. Okay. It's the morning in Nigeria. And okay, very good. Anything else to be shared before we start? We have another 4 more minutes, and I thought we would wait for the registered participants to come in. We have a wonderful group of people here I can see from all over the Middle East and more. Wonderful. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, 10 attendees, 11 coming in. Okay. Welcome once again. Thank you very much for joining us. And we look forward to an hour of discussions on performance, especially during this time. And I think that's a very key situation to talk about. And of course, there'll be questions, and you can post the questions in your chat box here, and I will definitely answer them. And given the situation with our Wi-Fi, sometimes talking, all of us talking could be causing some disruption with the bandwidth. So I will definitely be the main person speaking. But if either one of you want to pose questions in the chat box at the side, that would be good during the presentation. We will see how we go for time to be able to open up and have some sharing or some discussions after the presentation. It would be important and good to know that. So I think presently with Click Meeting, there is definitely some possibilities of having some questions asked. So good morning from Nigeria. Yes, welcome. Welcome to see everyone. Very good to see everyone here. Okay, so we have 3 more minutes and we should be starting. So once again, we have a presentation slides, and they are basically combined of the latest information which is coming in from all over the world. So we've got some infographics, we've got some very good sources of information as to what's happening now in terms of performance and what is going to be the preparation that we have to do for the future. Okay, wonderful. So we have 12 attendees now. Okay, great. Fantastic. So the slides from today's presentation will be uploaded on the Aztec website. So this can be also used as a reference as you wish after the webinar itself. Okay, wonderful. So it's good to see we have a very good range of people from different countries. And if anybody would like to share in the time that we're waiting, how things are going in your countries, how is the economic situation? Have you begun to open up the, are you still under some movement control orders, or is there a conditional movements? Good morning, yes. Please call me June. So my full name is Junaida, and please call me June Hamid. So welcome. My name is Junaida Abdul Hamid, and you can call me definitely. So I will be the presenter for this 1-hour webinar on managing performance of self, others, and the business during disruption. Okay, we have 13 attendees, wonderful. So we will be starting shortly. It's now 4 o'clock. So welcome everyone to this webinar called Managing Performance of Self, Others, and the Business During Disruption. So I'm going to share with you the presentation that we have specially prepared, and it's starting now at 12 o'clock Dubai time on the 3rd of June. So I see we have quite a varied group of people here, wonderful. So in terms of how we're going to structure this webinar is that we're going to show the slides. There are something like 25 slides to go through. So if there's any questions throughout, it would be good for you to park the questions on the chat box, which is on either side of your screen. And because of the way the Wi-Fi is intermittent and choppy for certain countries, it would be very good if the answers are parked here. We can answer them throughout the presentation, or I will return to them at the end. What is interesting is that also if we can have two-way conversations after the presentation, that would be good. So I will try to definitely present, explain, and also answer the questions as we work through the presentation itself. Okay, so let's move forward. So everyone is okay? Everyone is fine? Okay, we have 14 people now. So in terms of what we're really going to be discussing today, I think, the pandemic that we are undergoing now has, really disrupted, the way we have looked at working and how we work from today and onwards. And whether this is going to be the new norm is something that we will have to define for ourselves. So when you look at the pandemic, it's brought around, a very volatile, uncertain, challenging, and also ambiguous disruption to the whole world economy. And I'll share some key insights via infographics and some evidence and some research that would help from to get a deeper perspective and understanding of this. So basically, I think, personally, disruption and change and even crisis is something that is inevitable, and we have to look at embracing it. So there's going to be things like new paradigm shifts, enhanced competencies, power skills, and I really want to emphasize some upskilling that will happen as a result of this, which will be linked to your performance, which will need to be developed to adopt to this and emerge, of course, resilience, sustainable in this very evolutionary times. So I put here, usually we're given an hour, but if some of you would like to stay on and ask more questions. You know, I put a time frame of 2 hours because I'm very interested in understanding and sharing your concerns and questions in the group. So basically, this is the overview or the introduction of the webinar. Now, there are 5 areas that we're going to be talking about in terms of internalizing the effect of disruption on the individual, team, and organizational performance. So when I look at the spectrum of performance, it's always about how you manage yourself, you manage others, and also you manage the business. So whether you are a people manager or a individual team member, or you're a subject matter expert, you have to work with others. But firstly, you've got to have focus on the foundation of yourself. How do you manage your performance against the team and also the business or the organization itself? So then we're going to look at some specific performance and competencies, which, you know, in a VUCA world, in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, this is a given. And as far before, even in the beginning of 2010 and onwards, people started to coin this phrase VUCA. And so we will talk about how, regardless of whether there's a pandemic or there's future situations coming around, performance and competencies that you need to survive and thrive in this VUCA world will be talked about. Now, we're also going to be looking at the impact of the way of working and performance of self and others for how do you sustain the results. So things are changing. The way we do business has started to take a new form or a new format. And so we've got to raise ourselves to the standards of this new situation. So we're going to be also looking at those kind of paradigms in there. And so once we've got these 3 components, disruption, performance, competencies, the impact of the new way of working, then we can start to develop some key strategies. And so I'm going to show some particular areas. And given that it's, you know, 1 hour, there is certain things you can take away from these key strategies to craft and develop your own ways to survive in this new norm. And finally, we'll end with the performance action planning, which is a checklist. And I'm going to integrate what we've learned or what we've actually explored in all these areas to look at how are you going to integrate this for results for yourself. So you could come up with designing and incorporating what you've learned into your current KPIs, your key performance indicators, and also align it with your balanced scorecards or whatever performance management system you're using. So now, while I teach performance management and I do zoom into KPIs, critical success factors, balanced scorecards, and so on, it's a very technical focus area. So for today, I would have to, and it's kind of, it would be impossible to do all of that in an hour or less, because I take this workshop or course between 3 to 5 days. So when you look at what we have in 1 hour, I'm going to give you more of overviews and insights, but there will be some very distinct takeaways depending on how you view the information in here for yourself. Okay, so with that, I will now take you into the first. Wonderful. We have 21 people who have. We have 21 attendees so far. Thank you very much. Welcome to our webinar. We're just about to start. So rest assured, all the slides will be available later on the Aztec website, and we will just now go through all of this information. Okay. Okay, so when you look at the way things work in the organizations nowadays, you know, you've probably heard of SWOT, okay, SWOT analysis. So when you look at performance, and I would rather, you know, zoom in and, you know, basically go into the deep end of how things are. And even in a pandemic, there is always a SWOT analysis. Everything that you do, whether it's your life, your work, personal or interpersonally related, you're always going to be looking at, you know, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So in this shift, I would rather go straight into how are we going to look at the pandemic from a environment and a business scan. So from an outside, inside view, I'd like to look at it from the SWOT analysis. So when you look at the question, what is the new norm, looking at the impact of the pandemic, we're going to observe it from a SWOT analysis. So I've actually looked at some infographics or some key items that have been, for example, I looked at, and the sources are, of course, at the end of this webinar. Now, BBC has come up with some infographics, and they've, so what I've done is I've actually parked some of the areas that are, as a result of this pandemic, these are the weaknesses and the threats. So what are the outcomes that have weakened, for example, the business or the environment, is if you look at the first infographic, we have, the US oil prices have turned negative for the first time ever. So if you look at since 2000 and then now at 2020, you've got, oil prices which have gone plummeted. And that's, simply because people are not moving around, you're not having, movement or, socializing in terms of using cars or certain infrastructure. So you'll find that if there is a lesser demand, of course, the prices will go down. So that is the first, one of the first things to look at, how the weaknesses and threats that have happened as a result of the pandemic. So you'll also see that many advanced economies in the second infographic here, from Canada, from China, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK, and US, you'll see that many advanced economies, they're going to be entering into recession, and that's projected. That's projected from the time that this started up. For China, of course, it started in terms of the discovery of the pandemic was in December, January, and then it started to overflow into the rest of the world. And we started to see restrictions in movement around March. And if you're looking at it, March being the third month, and if you look at 6 months, we're looking at about September, October as a certain plateau or saturation point of the downturn, with some expected economic activity, of course, in the later part of the year. But what is going to happen is that this is going to be spread out throughout the year, and we're going to see definitely a recessionary sort of situation coming up. So this is something that, as a weakness and a threat, has come up, and it's definitely having an impact on your organization. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So the next slide here, if there's any questions throughout, please park your questions in the chat box. For me, it would be on a desktop, would be the right side. And so when you look at the new norm in terms of the impact again, the other weaknesses and threats would be the impact of the virus on the stock market since the start of the outbreak. So you've got things like in January of this year itself, we were starting quite nicely, and then suddenly we've seen this complete below situation. And then around the time when the movement control order started around March, you see the not even a sudden, but an immediate and immense dip. And you're looking at a minus 35, and in fact, around towards April, we see it actually very low. But then there is some light ahead, because you do see an improvement in the Nikkei, Dow Jones, and FTSE. However, it's still negative, but there is some upward movement. And just recently with the New York Stock Exchange, basically, I think when there was when there was this announcement that the work on the vaccine started, we saw a sudden spike or a 900-point jump. So it's very interesting how all of this is really attached to one particular denominator, which is the either the drugs to cure the coronavirus or the vaccine itself has an immense impact on recovery. So any news of that particular nature starts to create some definite positive outcomes. So that's very interesting. So in terms of how COVID-19 has impacted businesses overall, so the Youth Collab survey of 410 young entrepreneurs. Yes, welcome Victor and Noura. Welcome again, everyone else who has joined. We have 28 attendees. Fantastic. So when you look at how the business is impacted, you'll find that the largest issue would be basically there is completely stopped is 21%, 22% almost. Major slowdown, we've got 27%, 28%, and we have something like some downturn, 21%. Then you see positive impacts would be only about 6%, no impact at all would be 8%, and so on. So out of these 400 who have been surveyed, which is which is indicative but not conclusive, because you need a larger range, perhaps above 1,000 or more businesses. But this is who responded. And so you can see that, it's having a very significant impact. When you're looking at positive and no impact, and when you combine that, you're looking at about 15%. So generally, you're looking at about 85% have had a range of slight to completely stopped. And that's very, very, that's very powerful infographic just there, with this pie chart to show performance is definitely a knock-on effect because of the pandemic. So, with all this weakness and threats from the SWOT analysis, let's look at something that could be a strength, okay? So when you look at the strengths, there would be things like pollution has been cleared amid the lockdown. So at this time last year, if you look at the density of nitrogen dioxide in this infographic here, this picture here, which is a satellite image here, you can see the red has been fairly high among these sort of industrialized areas, whereby, at the time that was from the some of the movement restriction orders, you can actually see a reduction, even going to a lower range of pollution. So that would be some of the strengths, definitely, from this pandemic. Now, the opportunities would be something of the sort that you see technology has now created more potential, more opportunities. And it's very interesting how I've started to see a lot of job opportunities for data scientists, analytical people who are savvy with online media or social media opportunities and so on. So you find that there is, you either have to look at, changing your certain skills to be upskilled and to be aware of what are the type of things that you can work with online. So that has been really very interesting. So if you look at it, that Zoom, Netflix, and Amazon, in terms of their share prices, have actually really increased by, for Zoom, for example, is 130%. Netflix is about 28. Yes, a lot of us are watching, I think, a lot more TV at home, because there's not much to do, I suppose, during this time, and a lot more purchases on Amazon. So this is very significant, very interesting in terms of opportunities, and it's something that has a correlation to your organizations also. So that would be, a SWOT analysis of the pandemic itself. And so in terms of the disruption, basically it's definitely going to be a challenge, even to the most young or just emerging to the mature executive teams. So what's happening is that leaders across the board, they're having to think on their feet, leverage decision-making frameworks, with what they know and what they don't know, traditional and non-traditional, to guide and optimize decision-making. So what I've been hearing from the community that I coach and I work with, for example, they have had a lot of business continuity, online discussions and Zoom calls, basically about how to plan, for example, even people coming back to work. And so this is really unprecedented, because you've never had something of this sort ever. Even when in crisis or fires or any sort of like anything to do with the weather or storms or so on, you'd have some business continuity which needs to be looked at for a couple of days, weeks at most. But months, and even to this point now, we don't know how we're going to organize some parts of your business and your work. But we will discuss that, of course, in the next few slides. But there's a lot more questions about the way of working and the way of reaching out to your customers. And if you weren't online to begin with, this is also going to have an effect of developing some solutions that are definitely about closing the gap between your customers and still maintaining that sustainability of addressing the customers' concerns, ensuring that you have loyalty from your customers to continue with the businesses that you're offering, and so on. So there's definitely a lot of very interesting things that are coming up. So the key challenges, you'll find that for leaders, and when you talk about leaders, it also reflects back to you as a leader, whether you are a leader in your own portfolio or you're a team leader or a supervisor, and you go up towards the management hierarchies, every leader will have to look at, how some of these challenges are going to significantly impact yourself. So some of these challenges is individual mobility. So where you could move around very quickly within your workplace and also have meetings and then go outside externally, meet your customers, you'll find that you have to bridge the gap somewhat very differently now, right? And so you'll have to make very important decisions about the short and long term viability of your activities based on, how uncertain the economics is, the potential of less mobility, and so on. And the second one is, of course, information gaps. Now, earlier, you would be having a lot of information disseminated in face-to-face discussions, meetings, get-togethers, and then you would validate that information by reading your dashboards and also what's been disseminated in your emails and so on. So now you're really relying on what is the written word, and if you are able to speak, depending on your Wi-Fi, broadband connectivity, you'll have to make sense a lot about what needs to be done from very little information sometimes. So this is going to be something that's going to have to be addressed, and that cascading information for you, your team, and also the business is going to be impacted somewhat. So information gaps, dynamically evolving situations, and players in the game of decision making, it's now more complex than how it was. I mean, you were fast to make a decision. You would talk to each other face to face, pick up the phone, and then you would make the decision. However, now you've got to, rely on your own perseverance or understanding of the situation itself, make sense of it, and you've got to be most likely to be efficient and effective in terms of decision making, and also quite singular as opposed to being plural about making decisions in the long run. So you'll find that it's going to be complex, it's going to be layered, and that's something you'll have to build up as you progress. Now, you'll find that, for the first time, you're going to have to make very stressful decisions that look at employee and customer health and safety. So that's very important. I mean, in the past, it was a given that everyone, had certain, you have expectations around hygiene and health and so on. But now you've got to be very particular about looking at social distancing and taking temperatures, getting people to sign in, sign out. And then now we have technology that helps to, especially with QR codes, to track your movements in the workplace and also in shopping centers, because, at any point you could be asymptomatic or symptomatic. And if it happens, then you have to look at how are you going to contain some of the spread of this, right? So that's something very interesting. And I think there's also, as a result, you've got cyclical coming back to work. You don't have full-time 5 days. You may have 2 or 3, or you may schedule 50%, 60% coming in at certain times. So it depends really on essential services and essential staff that you have to now categorize coming back to work for certain periods of time. So there's a lot of stressful decisions now, even in terms of how do you protect your employee, how do you protect your business, and the brand itself. So the senior management, I'm sure, is working with your strategy teams and looking at how the value chain still has to, it's still business as usual. It still has to be there, and you still have to look at how do you stabilize the business now and also for the future. And there are some things that are coming out of this, in the sense that I think as of recent, in some countries the recovery is up to 81%. So which means that there is something to be said about the immunity buildup of people towards this, in terms of addressing the virus collectively. And we have become actually stronger, perhaps, with staying at home and building up our immunity. And so, this has a correlation to how at work you're going to start to see also some ways of building immunity, building up this. And so I can see some offices, they're doing sanitizations, they're doing some continuous disinfection and so on of the premises, to make sure that the immune boosting scenarios are maintained. So disruption is very interesting in the sense that it's causing a lot of things to be looked at. But I'd like to ask some questions. So where is your organization now? What are the main issues, and how are these issues being handled? Perhaps if some of you would like to put this in the chat box, what are some of your issues? Are they similar in terms of lack of mobility, in terms of decision making, in terms of customer health and safety, and also protection of employee brand? What are the issues that are different, perhaps, to what I've posed here in terms of the key challenges? So, anyone would like to share what are different situations or challenges from what has been stated here? Then perhaps we can hear from that. Anyone like to key in anything here? We have 31 attendees. Fantastic. Welcome to those who have just joined us. So we're talking about, we did a SWOT analysis. Now we're going into, what does the SWOT analysis mean in terms of disruption? We've come up with some key challenges. We're working through that. So it's fine if we have no questions for the moment. I'll move on. Thank you. Okay, so when you look at the effect of disruption on self, others, and business, so this is basically when you look at developing future leaders for high growth Indian companies. So this was a slide that I thought was very particular about, and it's coming from the Center for Creative Leadership and Tata, which is a well-known car industry maker in India. So it really looks at things like, what is the meaning of leadership? You've got leading self, you've got leading others, you've got leading the business. So when you've got to look at disruption, you've got to understand that a really big part of leadership is stabilizing and understanding self, your potential, your gifts, your talent towards how you would actually address the leadership. So we want to, and also address the disruption itself. We cannot make you different from who you are towards the things that are coming your way. So what you can, close the gap on, you would actually look at things like fixing your confidence, having self-awareness, getting and understanding your commitment to your company, your department, and also your personal goals, continuing with integrity in terms of when you're online and offline, and your timings at the workplace, because we have login and log offs. So integrity comes to also making sure that there's quality and quantity in the work that you do towards the company goals, and that's something there. Because when you work remotely, I mean, you don't want to be also handhold or checked on constantly as to whether the work is getting done. But I think there's a lot more here that's mutual trust and respect happening, that you lead self ethically and integrity. So that's really definitely something that's emerging. So becoming humane, I think there's a lot more concern now from this disruption to take care of others at the workplace, and looking at, perhaps HR is also looking at the demographics to see those who are, more susceptible. So I heard one of the organizations I'm working with, they are doing some pre-tests for those who are more or less susceptible to the virus itself. And when they find that there are two sectors of less susceptible, they will be scheduled to go back to work on a more scheduled basis. And those who are more susceptible, I think, would be asked to stay at home and then work from home. So, there are some pre-testing of looking at, how well people are, or how possibly they could be, also sort of like being exposed to the virus. So there's the humanity that's coming in, dealing with setbacks. There's a lot of, sometimes there's dysfunction with the Wi-Fi, and there's also your laptop and the the pressures of having to manage work at home. So I think setbacks are a given in terms of leading self. Then developing flexibility and adaptability is another thing. Definitely, you'll find that as long as you get the work done within a certain time frame, and then there's acceptance, mutual trust, and respect on that. Now, in terms of the seeing things from a new perspective, I think all of us have had a huge paradigm shift in terms of seeing things that we thought we knew and we realized we didn't know much about, and now we're improving that by gaining more skills about how to address those, and then dealing with ambiguity. So when you look at all of this, these are competencies itself, confidence, self-awareness, integrity, and so on. So these are competencies that you will have to look at addressing and internalizing, because you will have to use this to basically prepare yourself towards the disruption that's happening. So once that's done, the leading the self, then you go to leading others. You've got also other competencies to look at: managing and motivating subordinates, developing subordinates in the sense of the work that they still have to get done, managing the teams when you're on calls, being culturally savvy towards some of the demands of those who are at home, having to take care of family members and children and so on. There are some requirements that needs to be looked at, and you're just mindful of that. Building relationships. I think now there's a lot more of humanizing, and also everyone's on the same level. When you're in disruption, when you look at it, we're all going through this together. There's lesser of a differentiation, because when we're at the office, there is some hierarchy of sorts in terms of people in offices and people in certain areas and so on. But here there is, the pandemic is a great equalizer. We're all going through this together. So you'll find that you'll start to build some very important and different relationships, especially that is related to performance for peers and seniors. And you'll find that, knowledge, awareness, all this is very important to build your credibility. So being aware and up to date with information that is within the organization and also outside is very important. And that's helpful for leading others. Now, communication and feedback during this disruption is also very key, because you'll find that you'll have to look at ways to work on WhatsApp, on chat groups, and on online tools like Zoom, click to meeting, and so on. So you'll find that that's going to be very much interesting and a challenge, but you will overcome it, as because you've already gone through the part of leading self, and then leading others would be the next stage. Now, gaining influence. It's very interesting, because when you are working remotely or you're working online, influence is not as standard as when you are face to face. So you're going to be looking at how do you gain credibility, and how do you gain influence. But I think a big part of gaining influence is when you already are informed, you're well aware, and you've built your credibility, and you are very resolute and consistent with it. So your influence is also then something that is very it's stable for you. So people will listen to what you're saying based on the fact that you have evidence, research, background to support your efficient and effective decision making that you're doing. So you'll find that it's very interesting, on for example, even here I've got 38 attendees. So managing, and you're all stakeholders to me. You're all customers, and you're all aware, and you want to be taking from this webinar, for example, key value. So managing multiple stakeholders will be interesting. In this particular one, of course, it's more one way, and of course, I hope to see more questions in the chat box and also later. But the idea of managing multiple stakeholders is not only when you're online, but it is two-way decision and discussion. That's very important. So you have to be an active and proactive part of your organization to be still seen as somebody who's very viable and adding value. So that's very important. So when you have both these items of leading self, leading others in terms of competencies, the idea of leading the business comes much more naturally in terms of execution. You're very well aware of what are the operational challenges. So you become very savvy at maneuvering the issues and the concerns. Innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, functional knowledge, gathering information. So it's very interesting. I think when it comes to functional knowledge also, I mean, you definitely have an idea of how the business works. But now I think when you drill down, you'll hear more of, because timing is such that we're online for a short time, and then we have to make it work. We have to be very strategic with the information we share. You'll find you know more about your organization, don't you think? Don't you agree? If I was to ask the question here in the chat box, do you think you know more about your organization now that you have understood each other in a very, it's like it's a crisis point where in a zone where you have very little time, you have to be, you speed up to understand more about the concerns, because timing is crucial and so on. Would you say that you have gained further understanding about your organization, and also how the functions work together, and also how do you integrate that and then enable all of this to sort of like weather the disruption ahead. So I will take it that yes, we have improved our functional knowledge. We've begun to look at gathering information, knowledge, and insights. And I would say, like, because timing is also key, decision making, problem solving has improved, a broader organizational view and strategic insight has happened. And there's a lot of questions definitely about the customer. So, you know, in the past, it was a given perhaps on some interactions with customer, but I think now you're more acute and aware of how do you need to orientate yourself, the business, towards making sure that you have customer satisfaction, ongoing customer delight and satisfaction. So that's important. So all of this, when you have leading self, leading others, leading the business, handling organizational and cultural change, especially during the pandemic, is very much then a given. Okay, it comes seamlessly. So all of these are competency areas, and I believe you will be looking at integrating these competencies into your performance. In fact, you know, there may be a review mid-year because we're now in June, and I always look at, you know, this is a good crucial time for mid-year review. So if you look at the way performance management is, you've got, you know, your goal setting at the Q1, which is January to March. And then we've got the work actually starting in Q2. And then now we've actually ended Q2. But what we projected as some sort of, you know, way forward has suddenly changed. But I wouldn't want to say that it's changed so significantly. What you've done is you've modified what the KPIs may have been projected as. However, you may have to look at competencies and upskill of your behavioral competencies and functional competencies. That's going to be the ones that you're going to look at enhancing. And then when you're reviewing, for some of you definitely now who are reviewing your KPIs, your balanced scorecard for the mid-year, you'll be looking at these type of competencies and how can you integrate them to capture the work that you've done during this crucial time. So this is something that would be very helpful for you to look at and to have a very solid discussion with your supervisors and so on. Okay, so we're finished that part. Now, I'd like to also ask, because we've looked at some, you know, we've looked at the SWOT analysis, we looked at some key challenges, then we've looked at some competencies that will set you up for how to manage during this crisis. Now, you've seen this, I'm sure. You know, I've seen this in a lot of Facebook chats and updates about, you know, where are you during this time? So you've got, you know, the fear zone, the learning zone, and the growing zone. So I'd like to ask any of you, where are you now? So I've got one question, very good. How can an employer effectively gain the trust of employees in this era, especially when it comes to working from remote locations? So how can an employer gain the trust of employees? So from what angle is that? I'm assuming that the employer has to make some interesting and difficult, you know, decisions. And so is there a lack of sort of communication about what those decisions are? And that's why there may be some impact on the trust because they're working from remote locations? Or is it because, you know, you are online and offline? And so, okay, thank you. Telma, you are in the growing zone. Fantastic. So you moved from, I'm sure you were never in the fear zone. You were in the learning and then now you went into the growing. But yes, coming back to Chinelo's, Mogalu's question, I think it's a two-way situation. Now, it's very important that the employer and the employee basically works out a mechanics of how they're going to take note and cognizant of the work that's being done, and especially, you know, working remotely. Now, remote locations is because you didn't have to come back into work previously and you could work at home. But now, I mean, you're confined to home, and I would also have to say that, you know, the employer has to ensure that there are tools that are still given. So I noticed some of my counterparts went back to the office to get some of their laptops or desktops, and they had to enhance their broadband, their Wi-Fi. So the tools of that has to be also, you know, confirmed upon. And if there are challenges with that, you've got to look at how that's going to be the impact on the output of the work itself. So gaining the trust needs to be firstly established, whether there is a stabilizing of the access to your, the tools that need to be given or provided to actually make sure that you can get the work done. Now, the employer will, of course, have to, and at this point, I would say the supervisor or the employer would have to basically, we will discuss this also in the next few slides about the future of work. And trust is a big concern here in terms of like, as mature professionals, we should be looked upon to still be able to provide the work that is expected to the quality that is expected, especially when the supervisor has given expectations upfront as to what they want. And but firstly, the infrastructure has to be sound, the expectations have to be clear, and then the trust is two-way from all these components put together. So I think that's something that has to be worked out between both the supervisor and the employee itself, as opposed to just expecting things are not communicated clearly. There's a lot of assumptions or and so on. So I think that's very important. This kind of solidifying of that expectations is important. I hope that's answered your question for Chinelo. Trust comes from stability of the foundation itself, and then only work can get done. Yes. So it's a two-way discussion point, and it's very important that there is continuous. I mean, you have to have checkpoints. I always feel for performance, there has to be a checkpoint that is proactively created from the employee to say, how am I going? How are things going? Am I meeting expectations? Is there any gap, or is there any areas that I need to be improving on? And also the employer and the supervisor has to then touch points or touch base, but not confrontationally in the sense of asking, what are you doing now? What's happening? But more like, how can I help? Where are there any issues or concerns? And how can I enhance the situation towards you meeting your performance or your goals? So I always believe in this very strong connection between supervisor, employer, and also the employee during this time, more so to ensure that there's ongoing mutual trust and respect. So I hope that has answered the question. Okay, good. Okay, thank you. So fantastic. All of you have indicated that where are you now? You're at the growing, learning, growing. Fantastic. So, and I'll be honest, I mean, some of us were perhaps at the fear zone, especially when it first started. And it depends on the person that you are. If you are very positive, very proactive, and you see this as a good time to learn something from, to enhance your relationships with your family and also your co-workers online, sometimes this is probably the best time to address some of those fears. Now, in the learning zone, I think, yeah, fantastic. All of you are welcome. All of you who have just joined us also. So you're learning. So a lot of you are learning, and you have started to look at releasing the control of your traditional expectations. You've looked at the fact that things are fluid and non-traditional. You have basically looked at, you'll realize, yeah, people have stopped consuming what doesn't make them feel good, whether it's news or food. So I find that people have started to shut off, negative news, and they're focusing more on the positives. And, we're going back to the basics of home cooking, obviously, because you can't go out to eat, and you're rediscovering new skills. You are learning new things. I've seen a lot of posts on, this is my menu for the week. And I've also seen people taking up free courses, and, we've got some online courses, of course, in Aztec and so on, but there are some being offered out there, which is free, and or for a very minimal cost, in which people are upskilling themselves. So it's fantastic. People are really learning new things, and they're recognizing that we're all trying to do our best. Like I said, the pandemic is a great equalizer. We're all in this, whether it's a CEO right down to the the executives, they are basically all trying to understand and navigate. So we've all got to be very mindful of how we connect the dots for each other and make sense of it. So the growing zone is thinking now. So when you move from fear to learning, thinking about others, how to help them, finding purpose, being grateful, being humble, living in the present, living in the now. Exactly. I think that's really it's a very good infographic, of course, about where you are now and where you have come from, and of course where will you head towards and how. So for some of you in the growing zone, anybody wants to share how are you going to be okay from the growing zone? Okay, where will you head towards and how? If you can share that. But I have one question here. Since the pandemic, from Hajara, thank you very much. Since the pandemic basically forced organizations to adopt the work at home style, especially in Nigeria, where it isn't common in most sectors, how do you now transition to grouping your workforce to identify those functions or units that should continue working from home and those that absolutely need to be physically present in the office now that the lockdown is easing? Okay, so from it's very important to really look at your value chain. Okay, so I always go back to this situation of the groupings of your staff. Okay, in terms of who are your who are the types of people that are who are really giving the core value services in your organization. So when you look at the value chain, we have we have the R&D, and then we have the next stage basically is the internal internal sort of shared services, and then we have the customer fulfillment. So I would say that anything that falls under the chief operating officer, your operations, basically these are your core group of people. Okay, so and then you have the support systems, and these are your group of people that you also have to look at. Then you have others. Now others usually is like a ratio of your frontliners, but who have replicated jobs. So I think having an understanding of your core, your support, and also your others, and then defining them in terms of the ratios of so your core group would usually have a ratio of 1-to-1. So if you have one particular subject matter expert, and you define them as not easily replaced or having core knowledge, you'll have to then identify, you have certain criteria for your core group of people. So you'll have to say, okay, are you able to then work online, offline, or do you need to be physically present? So you've got to have criteria for some of these core functions. And then you look at the support, you also apply the same criteria. And then for the others, the same criteria. And when you look at it, it all has to be looked at. How do you serve the customer and the business? So you make fundamental decisions from there. Now that is one way of looking at these three groups of people within your organization. But then you've also got to look at fit for purpose. Okay, so fit for purpose is also identifying, like for example, within the core group of people, what is their demographic or their age group? If they may be more susceptible to exposure. So some organizations, they've done this pre-testing. One of which is we found from the crisis itself is that people who have, for example, low immunity, or they have diabetic, or they are above 60 years of age. So that is certain selection criteria. So what's happened is they have looked at, sort of slicing and dicing the demographics of the employee or the groups of people, and basically saying if you are a subject matter expert in the core group, but if you are above 60, or you have perhaps you've taken certain pre-tests, which now the company is rolling out via GPs, meaning all staff have to go and take certain tests. I know one organization that's doing that, and so if you have certain criteria that you are like already, you have a certain quantum, which is if they are considered like a red staff in terms of their exposure, but they're also important and so on, then you can make a decision of allowing them to work from home, and perhaps having minimal contact to come in, unless of course there's a need to sort of manage certain systems or certain situations. So I would say that you'd have to really look at slicing and dicing and categorizing your staff, and also the work that they do, the impact level, and that's definitely already in your business continuity plan. So strategically, you'd have to work backwards to look at what your BCP is, identify and strengthen some of these areas, and then apply those criteria back to your demographics. Okay, So is that answering your question, Hajara? Is that answering question in terms of your core, your support, and your others? Okay, fantastic. So it's really important that we work qualitatively, collectively at seeing the type of work and then working, to integrate that information. And it's happening now. I know a lot of HR teams, they are really drilling down to that analytics, and that is really going to support and help your business in the long run. Okay, fantastic. So let's move on. So wonderful. All of you are in the learning zone. Fantastic. So when you look at, when we go further into, so now we're going to look at managing self, the others, and the business. So we looked at some competencies, but if we look at managing self, now it's very important that throughout the crisis that you stay connected, you focus on your health, you remain positive, you remain informed, and you seek support. So when we look at connections, yes, we've got the baseline infrastructures all going. Now we're also focusing on our health to make sure that we're not unduly going out of your home unless absolutely necessary, and then you're masked or you're taking care of the social distancing norms and so on. Fantastic. Staying positive, immerse yourself in positive and informed go together. Immerse yourself in real news. There's a lot of fake news out there. You've got to make sure that you've got, I personally only look at information coming from the World Health Authority, WHO, World Health Organization, things like Al Jazeera or CNN. I want to make sure that there's neutral, very sort of evidence-based information coming in, because there's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of fake news. So we've got to sift through that and make sure that you're both positive because you are getting the right information. And when it comes to support, I mean, your immediate support is, if you were to look at it from the work sense, is your supervisor, okay? So you've got to be, looking for the right support and making sure that your leaders work for you. I mean, this is something I've always emphasized, you cannot also expect that, if you're living in because we're away, that we are more in a silo. So we really definitely need to look at encouraging support cross-functionally, cross-departmentally, but also like your first reference point is your supervisor. So they have to really also lead by example to reach out to you to see how you're coping. Okay, so I think there's definitely going to be reminders on the performance discussions, if not minimally at goal setting, media reviews, and also later at year end. But now you'll have more opportunities to have touch point discussions, and also for you as an employee to reach out and seek assistance and support, especially when you're navigating around this current disruption. Okay, so when you look at all of this, these areas, this is basically all of it that is very important. So fantastic, Talma, you are exercising 3 times a week, convincing husband to join me, attending free courses, follow and guide kids, yes, very much, and eating healthy food, maximizing, fantastic. I think it's really, it shouldn't be a stop-start for all of us. I mean, this is the best time to take reckoning. We recognize and we do a self-audit or a performance audit of ourselves, our personal situation, our homes. This is actually the best time to do those things that you wanted to do. And also, have demarcation points of your work and your personal life, and have a balance throughout. So from what you have gained from not having to commute to your work in terms of like the 2-3 hours, because now you're working from home, that's the quality or the value add that you can also use to enhance and do extra things, which of course are pointed out here in terms of maintaining a healthy lifestyle, and then also self-education, self-awareness, and so on. Fantastic. Okay, so let's move on. So when you look at self-management also, we have to look at leaders, okay? So self-management, leaders taking action. So when you look at the situations we've discussed, we've looked at all the areas earlier. When you look at how leaders have to behave in terms of the VUCA situation. Now, this is very interesting. Raghu Raghuman, who is the leadership professor at a recent TED Talks, okay, and basically he talked about the armed forces. Now, the armed forces are basically some, a group of people who are constantly sort of like, in a crisis mode all the time. So, what they propagate is very interesting, which we can take much from, is that they want to look at, leaders love chaos, because it's only in chaos that your core drills, your courage, your can-do attitude, all of that comes to the fore. The plans, the structures, the schemes. So your business continuity plan, they're just theories. But when you look at the crisis now, the pandemic, that is actually now the practice. You're no longer in a virtual situation. You are in the real now of a crisis, and you have to learn from it. So leaders, by choice or by design, you really need to look at how do you love and embrace chaos, because this is the time that you actually find everything that you know, your potential, your talent, your learning, your experiences, they all come to the fore, and your attitude, your behavior. People will remember how you behave or otherwise during this time. So it's very important that, you take, yes, fantastic. Okay. So it's very important that you take this kind of experiences to heart. So it is only in chaos that you find those fleeting opportunities, those passages, those holes, those opportunities that you can take there and then, which will enable you to deliver and again. So I'm definitely going to emphasize that during this time you will learn things, fantastic things, which you will, it is like it's the plateau of your experiences, but still you realize you can go further, and you can take that down, and we will be able to reminisce. I think perhaps 1 year from now, next year, you'll be telling yourself, what I went through makes me realize I can go through anything, right? So a lot of you will discover that you're so much better because of this exposure. So performance wise, you are at a peak. You're at a peak performance now because of the exposure that you have. So you'll definitely take a lot of what you're learning into practice into the end of the year, and also for the following years to come. So fantastic. Here, this is an answer here. My organization did a roster having 20 staff within a zonal office. I'm off duty this week. So, there is definitely an addressing of, especially when it comes to branch or zones, there has to be some business as usual continuity, because you are at the front line and you are having to deal with customers. So the roster is important in some ways to get some sort of cycle of movement, because customers, they do have valid concerns. They want to see somebody face to face. So you'll find that your working norms will start to be revived somewhat. But it's a way of addressing, as per the earlier consideration about ensuring that your core, your support, and your others, that is addressed carefully, and making sure that you also protect them when they do come into the office. And I'm sure there's a lot of preparations being taken care of in terms, like I said, social distancing, and the tables and so on. So we'll also share some of that in the next slides as to what's happening in the workforce. Okay. We now work in batches because management does not want every staff to come in at the same time. If you're not on duty, you are deemed to be on leave. If you're not on duty, you are deemed to be on leave. Okay. Okay, yeah, that's right. So if you, that's true. But if you are on duty, you are at home and you are logging in and logging off, you are basically working, right? You're not on leave. So taking action in a VUCA environment. So we have to look at volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Okay, question. How do you appraise frontline staff, production or maintenance, against support staff in terms of performance? So the frontline staff, how do you appraise them? So this would come back to, this would come back to the KPIs or the goals that have been set at the beginning of the year. So the appraisal process is really done against your standards. So you have a rating system. So that is basically the crux of performance management. So upfront, and this is covered, of course, in much more detail in the performance management balance scorecard workshops that we run. But when you say how do you appraise frontline against support staff in terms of performance, you appraise them against the standards, but the requirements or the key performance indicators are based differently, based on what they are doing in terms of their actual work. So the KPIs are the ones that are different, but their standards of assessment should be the same standard, meaning they are rated between 1 to 5. Okay, so that is the standard. There must be some standardization of measurements, but in terms of the differences in the measurements, that's what you're going to be doing. Okay, so you wouldn't appraise them any differently. They have no difference in terms of appraisal, but they have differences in measurements. Okay, so your measurements come from the goals that have been established at the beginning of the year, and the key performance indicators or key initiatives or key projects or key operations, okay, that you would measure them against, which are different. So does that answer your question, Victor? And we covered that in much detail. Okay, you don't appraise them any different because your standards should be consistent, which is rating them from 1, which is so 1 is usually it could be not meeting requirements, and then 5 would usually be exceeding expectations or exceeding performance. So 3s usually in the middle are meeting performance. So you would have to look at those kind of measurements that are upfront, listed within the goals as to expectations that they need to meet, and then you rate them accordingly. Okay. I hope that's answered your question. Now, this is slightly more. I mean, when you look at how performance management, I mean, like I said, I run a three-day train the trainer, really a certified program, and we go back down to the basics of designing the goals. The goals are very important because you've got to put that as the light at the end of the tunnel, and then you start crafting all the types of initiatives which comes from the policies, okay, which is things operationally that comes from the policies, and then you've got things that they do in projects, which you also capture. So currently, in your current situation, I would say you are all going into business as usual. So you're following some of the ideals within a production or your policies and procedures. So everyone is following now what's happening. But then there are some projects coming out of this because you'll have to review or enhance some of the policy and procedures. So you will be weighted and measured on the following the business as usual on your policies and procedures, and then also some enhancement projects. So what is important is to capture all the differences and changes during this 3 months and into the end of the year, and that you perhaps, I think most of you will be starting to modify your the KPIs. Okay, you'll be modifying some of the measurements in those key performance indicators. So it's definitely more technical because I would have to take you back to goal setting, designing that, and then changing and enhancing the measurements itself. Okay, but the standards don't change. Your rating system of 1 to 5, which you've established at the beginning of the year, shouldn't change. It's just the measurements will go through some modification. Okay. Okay, so I hope that's answered Victor's. Okay, great. So can KPIs work during this lockdown? Because some staff don't come to work, grade level 12 to downwards. So, okay, so if you have established not working during, you put them on some sort of leave, but you are paying them. So technically they're a staff. So legally you will have to assess them on the work that they do. So if you have designed a 3-month period in which you are not going to give them any work or they don't do any work, you will have to still assess them on the time that you recognize them doing the work, which is the balance of the 9 months. Okay, so I'm assuming that the movement control order is for 3 months. So you will have to look at a rating, in the first 3 months, January to March. So March to perhaps June, they're not having to do any work, but we're looking at July until the year end. And then you cumulatively look at assessing them in that 9 months. Okay, so yes, technically the KPIs will still have to work during the time that they are working, and technically not in the time that they are not working or able to deliver it. But it's interesting, if they're still getting a salary, I would suggest that there is at least some work allocated to them, some project work or some enhancement of policies and procedures. So any documentation that can be given to them, you could also capture that as a measurement under the KPI in order to do the rating. So I think that's important, because to not for them not to be able to work, I know it's not in their hands, but for those who are working, they may feel it's unfair that they also are taking the bulk or the burden of the work that's coming in. So, I think HR and also the supervisors will have to work out some sort of win-win ideal, because there's always some sort of work that needs to be done. And I think at this point, enhancement of policies and certain, especially procedures and standard operating procedures. So the policy is the big picture, may not need to be enhanced or modified. But definitely, I would say some of the procedures would need to be looked at in terms of the workflows, to look at some backup workflows. Okay, that's for the procedures. And then for the SOPs, also some backup or enhancement to provide in terms of, like, in crisis situations, you'll have to design this way and so on. So I think definitely there's a lot of work still. For those who can't come in physically, there are some things which they can contribute, and perhaps the team leader or supervisor of those types of staff that can't come in, there is some organizing online and also offline for them to work on enhancement or improvements. Okay, so I hope that's answered your question. Okay, for June. Okay, so let's move on. So when you look at the new norm for managers and leaders, looking at the impact of the pandemic. So when you look at Adam Grant, he has spoken at the World Economic Forum, and he says this is a time that managers need to be flexible, compassionate, give people freedom to make choices about how and when they work, and where they work from, and so on. So when you look at the future of work, this pandemic was actually a precursor to the future, because the future of work is, earlier we worked from the office. The second wave was, before the pandemic, is working from home with flexi work. And then the third wave, which is the future of work, is you can work anywhere. So we have now, we've activated the second wave, which is working from home solely. But the idea of, the third wave, which is coming in, working from anywhere, you will find that, you will have to look at managers, leaders, supervisors will have to look at flexibility of, addressing the thing where, as long as work gets done to the quality or standards or expectation that is there, you can basically not need to impose checks and balances constantly with the staff. There's mutual trust and respect from the fact that this pandemic is teaching us that you can actually work from anywhere, earlier than what we have expected. So leaders should then take opportunity to give the employees more control over their schedules, to reflect, what they have learned from the situation, because this is an enforced experiment. To tell you the truth, this is a social experiment. The pandemic has created social experiments which we have never seen. And from what we have seen now, we can see that it is possible to still be productive, to still contribute to your organization, even in remote conditions, even at home. You found ways to navigate with your personal life, to basically, be in a certain area and not have any disruption from personal or family and so on. And then you just focus on the work itself. So it has been fairly successful, I think, because things are still moving. You can find that, when you call the bank or when you are trying to buy things online, somebody's responding to you. Work is still getting done. So for that reason, I think the new norm is really confirming this experiment of being able to work from home. So that is the first component when you look at being able to fulfill managing others. Okay, so we've looked at competencies, we looked at managing self. Now we're looking at managing others. So I think that's these are key considerations. So let's move forward. So managing the business. So we've covered all these two sectors. Now we look at the main part. When you've been able to manage yourself and others, it's very important that managing the business would be a very, very core part. So how do we manage now and in the future of COVID? So you'll find that the decision making now that has to be very efficient and effective. You're looking at, they're very concerned about the traditional part, the revenue, the cost, the risk, and then also the social part, which is community, emotional, ethical, and then also the crisis management of safety, continuity, and resiliency. So you'll find that the leaders now will have to optimize their decision making. They will have to look at revenue, cost, and risk to make sound decisions in a very rapidly dynamic, out of control, sometimes evolving situation. and looking at crisis management by using safety, continuity, and resiliency, and so on. Looking at the social realities of the pandemic, looking at how do you still instill community, how do you address some of the emotional upheavals and changes, and the ethical criteria of doing work as seen, and also to help things that are fiscally successful and meaningful for all stakeholders. So currently, when you look at it, a lot of the leaders are focusing on, firstly, is the business viable? Are we basically able to recover or look at having the revenue that we have? At one time, I think maybe for a couple of months even during this pandemic, there was absolutely no revenue. So you can imagine from the airline industry, for example, people are not traveling, and they just had no revenue at all. So that was something which they never foresee or foresaw in any way. So similarly for the travel industry, for the hotel accommodations and so on. So you'll start to see and hear of some sad stories where staff are being let go because the first thing that happens when there's no revenue is that you look at your highest costs. You start to reduce your highest cost, and the cost of staff is something like 60% of your ongoing operations. So and what's happened is there is now some downsizing, redundancies, simply because there is no cash flow to actually ensure the ongoing sustainability of the business. So it's very important that you are very you're very thorough about why certain decisions have to be made. You're very transparent as a leader to manage the business, that it really is about whether this company is going to survive in the current and in the future run. So some of the interim measures that have been taken by some companies is that they have started to look at no pay leave to be used up first for people who are on leave, and then who are extended above their leave. And then they've also looked at reducing the salaries of the higher level, so it's not going straight away into the lower level to reduce salaries, but they're working upwards to the down parts. And there's a freezing of certain benefits utilization. So anything to contain the cash flow position has been a very strong focus from the businesses. And so we all have to look at this as a given. It is an output of a very precarious situation for all of us. So we can't hold on to the fact that the job is there for life or for good. Luckily, some other industries have provided some of these mitigative plans, and they've kickstarted other projects or other revenue streams that can be done to still keep the business going, because no one wants to see staff going or being let go. I mean, it's the worst thing that can happen, especially in this pandemic or crisis, that you would like to see staff. I mean, nobody wants to be let go or likes to see anyone to be let go for any reason. So this is why I think everyone has gone into really retention, retaining, down, sort of like looking at essentials, and working on stabilizing some of the cash flow situations or revenue situations. Okay, so yeah, so I think that's really how the business is. And so for those of you who are in HR, not in HR, or in the operations, you have to be mindful of this impact. And definitely, the business, you want the business to still continue. So there will be a lot of focus on the core segments of the staff, while the support and the others, you will find there will be some downsizing or reduction, and hopefully there will be some management or outplacement for this to mitigate some of the effects of this. But it's in no one's control, and so we have to look at it as a necessary hazard as a result of this, and embrace it as saying, okay, if it happens, we've got to look at the upskilling of the staff and so on, who are still around, and we have to maintain and manage those who are also leaving. So there's some considerations definitely happening. So okay, I think online training will go a long way to help. There's not okay, to help prepare, yes, definitely, for future work. But I have to emphasize, look for skill sets or courses that is going to add value, and not something which is if it's for your personal life, fine, but when it comes to your professional life, be very particular about knowing things that will help your viability back at work, because you've got to also prove during the time that you're away, when you and eventually go back to work normally, like what did you do during this time that enhance your skill sets? So competencies being one, but I think some technical functional skills would be also good for us to know, so that when you come back, definitely you're adding value to the organization. Okay, growing zone. Come to understand it's not a death sentence usually. Yes, I mean, we went through a time where, we were in a status, we were stuck. But now I think we are moving, and people are embracing and opening up economies. And with a almost 81 to 85% recovery rate, and a vaccine which is already definitely in the plan and the pipeline. So things are working out, things are happening, and we have always been very resilient this is resilience is something that's built into humanity. So I have definitely sure that this is definitely going to happen. Okay, so let's move forward. I do apologize. We're now at slide 15. We are getting through. So I like to share the performance and competencies in a VUCA world. So, okay, where does staff safety, staff exposure come in terms of rating of staff input to the business comparing to those working at home against those scheduled on a frontline work basis? So there is no comparison. Okay, to be honest, it's a very disruptive situation now, and I would personally like to say that there is, the value of what you're doing at work at home is just as valuable as those at the front line. In compensation, what's happening is, while the rating is the same, you may offer some extra compensation in terms of allowances to mitigate some of this overexposure. You would take more actions to take care and protect them by giving them additional face masks, visors, sanitizers, gloves, protective gear. But I think rating them because they are more in the front line as opposed to those working at home may create a very disruptive way of performance. So because I think everyone needs to still work as they do, but the only difference is those at home will not have the protective gear, while those at the front line will have everything that the company will do to protect them. But still, the quality of the performance and the output is the same because they're following the SOPs, the policies, the procedures. So why should there be an imbalance in terms of rating? Okay, did that hear you? Is that heard? Okay, so what I'm saying is that, okay, the network is freezing. So I'll repeat that. Okay, so in terms of rating of staff in the front line and others, there are sort of actions being taken by organizations to provide more emphasis on protecting those frontliners with protective gear and also allowances, in terms of the situation. But in terms of rating them, there shouldn't be any difference because the performance is still as per the goals, as per the measurements that were already defined. So there should be no difference in rating. Consistency is key. Okay, so they're still doing the same work. However, they are given also further consideration and further protection by the organization, so that there shouldn't be any differentiation because that would cause a huge imbalance in terms of rating systems, okay, and the expectations. Okay, I'll answer this here. Okay, great. So Victor, you've heard it. Fantastic. Okay, so when you look at hard skills and soft skills, so I like to look at this new way moving forward is we have to establish power skills. Okay, so hard skills, you've got your technical parts, proficiencies, operation, programming, but soft skills, are something that is going to be really key to be emphasized in this new norm. And they are power skills, okay? Communication, flexibility, teamwork, time management, and so on. And I'll explain in more detail as to what power skills are, because power skills, according to the World Economic Forum report, they are basically the top 10 skills required in this year, but also for the future. In terms of all these areas, these are competencies, and these are power skills which are related to how you, because you can teach someone technical skills, to manage a computer, to learn a language and so on. But power skills are ever enduring. They never leave you. They will be with you constantly. They're not transient or transitionary because they are built in through exposure and experience. And so once you have them through that exposure and experience, any situation that is thrown at you, you can actually, rather than sink, you will swim, and then you will also fly. Basically, because of the fact that you've got complex problem solving. So any type of problem, critical thinking in any situation, okay? Weighing and being creative and innovative, managing people, coordinating with others, collaboration, emotional intelligence, judgment, service orientation, negotiation, cognitive flexibility. So if you look at it, this is the skills that are going to be something which we need to look at. And the top 5 skills are there, but in terms of top 10 hard skills, blockchain, cloud computing, analytical reasoning, artificial intelligence, and so on. So short of the things that are very technical, there are things in there in the top 10 hard skills which you can do now. So what I'm suggesting is, if you are doing online learning, I would look at, it's important to focus on a hierarchy of needs of analytical reasoning, being aware of artificial intelligence, business analysis, and so on. So these are the type of areas that I would suggest strongly that you start looking at courses to improve yourself and also add value to your performance. So let's look at the next one, the economic impact of coronavirus. So when you look at the impact of the way of working and performance, I know I'm slightly going off. It's now 1:18 in Dubai, but I did project that we would have 1.5 to 2 hours, but I will still go on. And if those of you who have to leave, I do apologize, but the slides are also available. This is recorded, you can access it later. So let's move on to slide 17 of 25. So the impact of the way of working and performance. So if you look at, Dr. Ileana from Imperial University in the UK. So she's basically the professor of design and innovation. She said, businesses all over the world, they're faced now with unprecedented, unknown and situations. So business agility, ability to respond and adapt to change faster. So you'll find that online, what is emerging is that the bricks and mortar retailers are closing their physical stores, but they are starting to look at adapting to reinforce delivery services. The restaurants that were forced to shut down quickly now are converting into takeaways, and they're all going online. I mean, the future of online has come earlier. So if you look at, for example, in the future of e-commerce, even for the 7 Asian tigers for Southeast Asia, the future and value of e-commerce itself is projected. They did a projection for 2025 is going to be something like USD 300 billion. Okay, and this year alone, Lazada has is projecting to make 900 USD million out of Shopee. Shopee is going to make 900 USD million out of the 7 countries in Southeast Asia. So the future is definitely e-commerce, online, and you'll find that you have to start definitely putting technology inroads into this area. If not, you're going to be left behind. So everything we know now is going to be something we're going to have to explore in terms of the e-commerce or online presence that we're looking for. So you'll find that, for example, Amazon is now hiring 100,000 new employees for its warehouse and delivery of operations. So logistics, as a result of this e-commerce industry, that's also an area that is going to boom. And you'll find that you'll have to start, hiring for those sectors for your organization, for example. So you'll see a change from your earlier modus of your support and your other staff as your frontline physical stores, moving into perhaps the back end and supporting the core operations. So you'll find that also some things, which is fitness clubs, are now offering online classes, and then universities, of course, offering lectures remotely. So the more businesses that are staying agile and resilient, the higher the chance of survival. So that's a given, definitely. So what's happening is that, when you look at opportunities, when we did the SWOT analysis, it is very, very clear now the huge opportunity is that there are going to be new ideas, actions, innovation, and necessity is going to be forcing you to do this. So the businesses that have always had an innovative culture are actually in a privileged position. So if your organization has been very much about the new, innovative, embracing IT systems, technology, agility, big data, and so on, you're in a pole position to look at leveraging on the opportunities and developing and implementing. So I would say that, this time now has given a lot of, apart from auditing and doing environment scans for your organization, you've started to see an emergence of, focuses on priorities which are to enhance your current value proposition and look at online e-commerce presence more cohesively. So when you think about it, is your current business viable in this environment? And I'd like to ask any of you here, is the current situation with the crisis, have you started to change your business model? Have any of you started to change your business model? What are your companies starting to do? Are you doing similar things like, having to adapt and change? Anyone likes to share? What are the types of changes your current business is going? Have you had to change your business model? Okay, so anyway, I think definitely there will be changes. So it's whether we embrace it as openly and possible that is important. Okay, I see Elijah and Victor who are answering. There are changes, definitely, and your business has had to adapt. Anyone has looked at enhancing online presence, looking at e-commerce gateways, having to look at, so your initiatives under your goals is also going to change. And you'll have to modify some of the KPIs. Still experimenting, working online. How can e-commerce run the oil and gas sector? Now, to be honest, okay, the oil and gas sector is still very traditional, and e-commerce is very much on the individual, the individual buyer as opposed to the plural commodity buyers. So I would say that e-commerce is geared towards singular purchases at the moment. For oil and gas, it's a very particular situation. But in terms of there's still some hardcore on the ground things that have to be done as per similar other industries. You will find that you may have to have you would have to look at your customers having more access into your systems, and you will find that you will have to interface your current sort of plural or bulk buyers and so on, into the interfaces that you use. So for example, if you're using SAP and all that, they may have just stopped at having your SAP systems, internally, your ERP systems internally, but you'll have to now open up interfaces to your external customers to access some of the areas where they can then, purchase or, so you're looking at sort of buyers from the, from the sort of like industrial buyers having accesses or dashboards to your current systems. So that would be the modifications for e-commerce for them. But like I said, it's a very, very emerging situation. So you'll have to speak to some of the e-commerce experts who have already started this kind of inroads with their sort of industrial buyers. Okay, so I hope that answers your question, especially for the oil and gas. Okay, we have migrated the learning content for the physical school to virtual learning platforms. How can e-commerce help the maritime sector, especially government regulatory agencies? So similarly, yes, e-commerce, if you look at it as an industry, because the singular buyers, they buy into a product and a service, so that's the monetizing part. But when you look at industrial or plural buyers, especially agency buyers and so on, they still will have to buy products and services that you are offering, whether you're an agency, whether you are a service provider, whether you're in the maritime sector. So you'll have to open up some of your current internal systems to interface with them more directly. So they will start to, you'll have to build dashboards or singular accounts for them in which they can access products and services coming in from your particular industry. Okay, so definitely enhancing our digital channels in terms of internal, external communications, customer engagements. This present crisis has reaffirmed the new reality. Yes, the digitization is the new, definitely. So where you found you were very happy with them accessing your website, but then they didn't have much interface. So you'll find that you'll have to start creating more interfaces with your clients, your customers online via your websites, and then also digitizing it with apps so that they have real-time information and access. You'll find that this is something that will be needing to be looked at in more detail, especially to close the gap between your industry customers and also your singular customers. Okay, so you'll have to look at creating those kind of interfaces more directly. Okay, so that would be some of the things that can come out from e-commerce itself. And so when you look at it, your the standard operating procedures, your SOPs, your policies will start to be modified and changed, okay, to be enhanced as to how e-commerce is now integrated into your current scenarios. Okay, so is that something that answers your question? I think there's definite inroads and discussions happening with your IT experts and digital experts, and you are reaching out perhaps to those who are at the cutting edge of technology, and they are better informed to give you more insight as to what works. So work with people who have got proven experiences to be able to confirm the ROI, the return of the investment, because e-commerce, once you establish it, it is a huge amount of money, and you've got to work out the return on that investment in the near future. Okay, fantastic. So let's move on. Good questions. I really like how everyone is very very collaborative, very integrated into the subject. So this is just one of the situations that will happen. The impact of the way of working and performance. So when you look at experience management, areas of focus, these are the three phases of heading back to business. So when you look at heading back to business, it could be in a virtual or even a face-to-face scenario. But you've got to look at how are you going to approach customer experience. If you look at this matrix guide, you've got phase 1, explore, phase 2, reorient, and then you've got normalize. So this is wonderful. The purple zone is where, we expect a normalization, a back to business. We don't want, or we cannot have a situation where the virus overcomes and takes over the way of life that we have. So we have to look at, for all intents and purposes, we are moving back to a face-to-face situation, but we take the we take the value of what we have overcome and understood to enhance some of our interfaces, especially in terms of online presences or e-commerce integration and so on. So you will have to look at customer experience, employee experience, the brand experience, and the product experience. So this matrix is very good. It is from the XM Institute of Qualtrics. All the references and sources are at the on slide 25. So you can see that later as you want to download it from the Aztec website. So it's very important that for customer experience, you have and for all these sectors, you explore for phase 1 and ask. It's always about asking questions. It's very important. So these critical success questions are tied back also to the performance goals that you are wanting to meet in terms of what happens after the pandemic is over, or what are the things to happen enduringly as we get back to normalization. So exploring is, are we making it easy for customers? Are we making it easier for employees to come back? What do people think about our company and our commitment? So our reputation, brand is important. Are we adjusting our offerings appropriately? I mean, when it comes to the physical products, they can't go and now touch and feel certain things, but we still have to give them an experience. So I think now under some of your portals, you're also exploring the virtual experiences, especially when it comes to car buying. You can't go for a test drive anymore, perhaps, but you're given a virtual simulation of how it would be test driving a Volvo or a car, for example. There are videos now to give you that kind of experiences. So you'll find that the visual is more emphasized now as opposed to the touch and feel that we were used to, but we're navigating, we are adapting to this in the interim. So when we look at reorienting, we look at the emerging patterns of customer activity. What are customers expecting? Because they are just as fearful of exposing themselves. So they will only go to places where they know that their safety is taken care of or looked at. So that would be the reorientation. And emerging patterns of employee activity in terms of, for those who are offline, remotely, online, and so on, you've still got to make sure that the performance expectations are very clear. The rating mechanisms are very clear and transparent for everyone. And so nothing should significantly change in terms of rating performance, because it's still output. We always look at outcome. We rate someone as to what have they done significantly, qualitatively, to impact the organization, whether in their portfolio, department, and so on. Okay, so there will be a lot of interesting things which will be coming up from performance itself. So brand experiences, emerging patterns of messages, product usage, and then so when it comes to normalizing, it's really learning from exploring, reorientating, and then we normalize. How have we integrated some of these experiences, the listening, and also for tracking, improvement, and so on. So this is a very good matrix to prepare you as to how you are heading towards that. Okay, okay, fantastic. Yes, let's move on. So when we look at the key, so I've actually integrated some things of what we've talked about. When you look at key strategies to overcome and thrive in the new norm, I always look at it in terms of people, process, and culture. So some of the, so when you look at all of these three components, what is the hardest, what is the easiest to change, and what is the hardest to change in the new norm? Can anyone share with me what is the easiest to change and what's the hardest to change? What is the easiest to change? The easiest to change is? The easiest to change would be? Exactly. Fantastic. Process is easiest because process is something which you can, you can do quite significantly quickly. And if it's modifying your policy, your procedures, and so on, it can be done. Okay. And if it's tweaking a system or updating or enhancing, it can be done. However, people are the hardest to change, simply because they are very used to comfort zones, to norms, and so we find that they are the ones that we need to convince more in terms of adjusting to the change. Now, people are part of the culture, so when you have singular situations, you can see that they from the people come the practice, from the practice comes the culture. So now is the culture of actually disrupting, getting out of the comfort zones. So the culture is somewhat now going back into influencing the people itself. But are people changing? So this is something that's going to be a question that you will probably ask yourself, others, and also those working in the business across the board. So people itself, you can see that the world will be returning. It's very important to see how have they taken root or something away from this disruption, and so the world will be turning from resilience to return. So to get back to business, analytics on how many people spaced 6 feet apart will fit into an office, planning one-way paths through the workplace, figuring out adaptations to restrooms. So, but what is really needed for people when they come back from from the experience to the new norm is that they must have the muscle. Okay, they must have worked out a situation in their minds and their approach, that they have they have worked on something which is a muscle is something which you apply activities, you strengthen it, and then you use it. Okay, so the muscle is that it must be a return to working, where an enterprise-wide ability to absorb uncertainty and incorporate lessons into the operating model quickly. We must never forget from what we have gone through, and we must really keenly use the situation to be better, to be highly adaptive, and to be really genuinely concerned for self, others, and the organization. Okay, so this is very important. These are some of the key takeaways, and you'll find that when people come back, perhaps they are, there's a new realization, there's a new shift in perspective. So that's going to happen, and but you will pick up from those who don't, and this is why we need to normalize the behaviors to influence them to move towards this kind of like innovative and very agile, responsive culture that we want to create out of this. So improving the experience of internal, so this is an example for culture. You'll find that internal and external customers who are really deeply certain about the new normal, you'll need to look at renewing and refreshing their connections. So they will be looking at responding in terms of digital excellence, safe and contactless engagement, and dynamic customer insights. So the digital excellence is you'll find people are more savvy now in terms of apps, in terms of exposure to online tools and collaborative tools and so on. And but they'll be concerned about, you know, how safe and what about contactless engagement. So you'll find that you really have to give assurances and also look at you know, viability through sort of visual infographics, simulations, virtual situations, because they still want to buy or to invest in a situation for your organization, but you must give them insights. You must give them qualitative information, and people don't want to read, so they want to look at visualization of why they make the right decision. So share experiences, simulate experiences, and create that, you know, that win-win for them to create that culture. And when we talk about internal and external customers, you're really also talking about internal stakeholders. Your staff is also the customer. And so they will need to be given all these paradigms and in order to build the culture for both your internal and external customer in that sense. So process, of course, a top skill, which is really coming out of all this, a key strategy which you'll have to focus on is analytics. Okay, so you'll find that one of the things that you are really exploring and discussing in all your online collaborations is you were analyzing a lot more. You were taking key takeaways. You were looking at you know, majority opinions. You were looking at indicative or conclusive. You were finding a differentiation between how analytics now is going to add a lot of value to what we saw, because earlier it was like you only wanted proof where you can see, touch, and feel, but now you have to look at analytics, you know, from the data. You have analytics, and then you have effective decision making coming out of this. So this is why analytics will help you a lot to forecast demand, identify potential supply chain disruptions, target support services, determine effectiveness of at-risk or crisis intervention strategies. So this is important. These are some of the key strategies you have to integrate. Okay. So I'm just sharing some more. This is more for your own reading pleasure, but key strategies to be looked at for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We have the approaches where you understand, for volatility, you understand processes, you experience resilience, become principled, uncertain, become knowledgeable, you have more, you seek information, okay, and awareness. Complexity, you've got to look at how you break down issues into simpler, easy to understand bite-sized information, and then you build up understanding from there. And when it comes to ambiguity, you have to look at it like a social or science experiment. So you'll have to look at simulations or pilots or prototypes, you know, phase one, before you actually go into launching the whole thing. So these are just some of the strategies, which is good as an infographic to look at. Okay, so let's move forward. And some of the other key strategies to look at, also this is just for your own value add, 4 actions to address immediate customer needs and preparation for the future. You focus, this is under McKinsey and Company as a whole. You can also look at your internal customer, your external customer. Look at really being, and so, you know, this would be, you could look at it as a trajectory from focusing on the baseline care and concern, meeting your customers where they are, reimagining the post-COVID-19 world, and then building agility. So you have to start from a baseline of, you know, your foundation, focus on care, then addressing the needs of your customers. Once you have both of them down pat, then you start looking at a better or a future world that is basically going to be enhanced, because, you know, you're going to see some hard situations also, economic hard times, cost cutting, migrating customers to digital channels. Brick and mortar stores may look very different post-crisis because there's a lot more restrictions when you go and visit these areas. And all of this cumulatively must be looking at how you build agility for the next, you know, of what's next, or fluid times. So So this is just a very good infographic from McKinsey and Company as to how to deal with situations. Okay, so this performance action planning. So we're now coming to the end of the webinar, and this matrix is something where I've taken you through an environment scan via the SWOT analysis for the COVID itself or the pandemic itself. Then I've shared some areas of competencies, performance, competencies for yourself and for others. And then we've looked at some key strategies to overcome the pandemic itself. But when we look at the final takeaway is like, what are you going to do for yourself? So what's next is performance action planning for results. So I would say that that it is important to look at assessing and documenting your personal SWOT analysis, this is something which you can download later and do, but look at your strengths, your potential to enhance, weaknesses to constructively improve, opportunities, situations, and talent to leverage on, and then threats to identify and reduce. So this is just something you can do on your own, and you may take a screenshot, or you perhaps can download the template later on and do it on your own. But I think it's important to look at one of the key takeaways from this whole pandemic itself. So let's look at the next part is, so the performance action plan would be this checklist, okay? And I've taken you through the 5 sections of this webinar. So first and foremost is undertake an environment scan, do a SWOT analysis of your business, and understand and develop key focus areas for the business to adapt to survive, understand and internalize the key competencies to thrive in the new norm, and then review and integrate the key strategies to overcome and thrive the situation. Now, after that, assess and document your personal SWOT analysis. Now, all these 5 areas, you need to discuss current and to be enhanced KPIs for your balanced scorecard or performance management. So all of this is questions or areas of focus which need to be enhanced upon. So when you're doing your mid-year review towards the year end, you're going to be also looking at reviewing and revising some of the measurements. The ratings remain the same. The expectations of those ratings are the same, but your measurements are going to undertake or going to be enhanced. So looking at all of these components, you've got to integrate that into your KPIs for your balanced scorecard and your performance management. And also, the mid-year review is the best time while you're reviewing some of the KPIs to also look at how can you strengthen your learning opportunities for the rest of the year, which is either on the job, supervisor coaching, and also online learning. And so the reason I put here documenting learning opportunities is that you're learning all the time. Okay, currently, even with this webinar, you are learning. This 1 hour plus is actually a learning opportunity, but you are learning as you are going and navigating through with new tools and techniques. And you must reach out to your supervisor for coaching. Okay, that's important. And then, of course, online learning is an enhancer, but be very strategic and focused as to what type of skills or areas or power skills are you going to enhance. Okay, so this has to be integrated and documented in your performance management form so that you capture the whole range of the experiences throughout this pandemic in terms of then. So to me, that is an optimal way of managing performance of self, the others, and also the business during this disruption. And of course, anything else you can actually put here in your questionnaire. So any questions? Very good. Process is easiest, but you have to prepare their minds towards these changes. So this is the performance action plan checklist, which I've given. And so with that, this is the end of the webinar. I thank you very much for your time, but I'm not going to end it just yet. I'm just going to show you the sources and the further reading. They're all located here. This is where the bulk of the information is in more detail if you want to explore. So I'd like to ask you, what would be some of the, so any feedback and any further questions before we end the webinar? And once again, I do thank you for being very patient and understanding and collaborative with the questions. Thank you, Victor. Thank you very much. I do appreciate it. I was trying to get the best information for everyone, given that we have, okay, the sources. Thank you very much. Yes, the slides can be downloaded from the Aztec website. So after this, the very place that you registered for this course, you can actually see the whole recording of the webinar. So the if you want a screenshot, I can show you now so these are the sources for further reading. Okay, you can do a print screen or a screenshot and you can access this later. But the 25 slides are available online via the Aztec website. This whole webinar has been pre-recorded. So thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Absolutely. So have a good rest of the day and good weekend. And once again, I thank you for your patience, your time, listening to this webinar, and I hope it's been very useful for all of you too. Okay, thank you. Thanks again, you've been a wonderful audience. And we do hope to see you in person in the future in any of the courses that we're also undertaking in Dubai and also online, as we have some online offerings on similar situations. Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. So I'm sure you have to get back to your important work. So we'll see you then. Thank you very much.